This is Jessie, and you're listening to the Curious Cabinet Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back. I hope you all had a good week. My week has been filled with sick kids, and everyone has been sick in my house, and I thought I escaped it, but as of today, I'm like, ugh. But anyway, that's why this podcast is coming out a little bit late tonight. I just didn't get a chance to do it. And yeah, anyway. All right, so I'm going to start off by correcting myself because at the end of last episode, I think I said there were 7 more cold cases that they closed, but there was actually 8. So correction there. All right, but like I said, everyone has been sick in my house and I haven't had a chance to do this really. So I did as much of a deep dive as I could, but each case that I'm talking about has a lot of information, and I think eventually I'm going to do like a single episode for each of these cases that have been confessed to. But other than that, I just wanted to give you an overview of the different cases and everything, all the confessions. So with that being said, all right, I'm going to introduce to you Peter Vronsky and Jennifer Weiss because they are crucial to these confessions. Now, Peter Vronsky is a Canadian true crime author and a filmmaker. He was specializing in serial killer and criminal history. He's written several books over the years, including works on Richard Cottingham. I believe he was somewhat featured in that A&E special about Cottingham as well. He's also created a comprehensive website dedicated to Cottingham's crimes and confessions, and he does update it regularly. Vronsky has his own personal connection to Cottingham. Now, I remember in my first episode, I can't remember if it was the first or second of about Richard Cottingham, that Vronsky was in the hotel where Cottingham had killed Didi Goodarzi and the unknown Jane Doe in December of 1979. Now, this event had haunted him and also sparked like deeper involvement and wanting to, get more into this case. But since 2018, Vronsky had actually begun contacting Cottingham. He would speak to him daily on the phone and visited him several times a year. Now, Vronsky had described their relationship as ongoing, with investigations currently in progress, so he does still talk to him. Now, Jennifer Weiss, if you remember from the last episode, she was the biological daughter of Didi Goodarzi. She was adopted about 18 months before Didi was killed and only learned about her biological mother's death through an adult DNA testing thing and doing her own research around 2010. Now, Weiss has become an advocate for victims, using her story to highlight cold cases and the importance of getting closure. She's appeared in different documentaries and podcasts, sharing her journey of forgiveness and pursuit of truth. Now, their collaboration started in 2018 and 2019, when Weiss had first contacted Vronsky about his encounter with Cottingham in the elevator. The two decided, hey, let's try to get some more confessions out of Cottingham. And Weiss had already begun talking to Richard in 2017 because she was trying to find the rest of her mother's remains since her head and her hands were never found. Now, this kind of grew into an unsuspected friendship through the letters and phone calls and visits. And it was described as a vessel for his confessions, despite the emotional toll it took on Weiss. Now, Vronsky leveraged his historian's access to gain more access to interviews and help police in assisting and verifying details and facilitating connections with law enforcement. Now, Vronsky has assisted with at least 11 confessions and also tipping off Nassau police in 2021 about potential Long Island leaks, leading to the confessions that we're going to talk about today. Weiss's relationship with Cottingham was instrumental in softening him and encouraging admission and closure. She helped in the Lorraine Kelly and Marianne Pryor case and broader spectrum things like trying to identify the Jane Doe who was killed the same night as her mom. She considers her effort as a way to honor her mother and help other victims' families despite the personal cost. Now, their combined efforts have been highlighted in Rolling Stone magazine, various podcasts, documentaries, and Vronsky's expertise and Weiss's personal connection really helped resolve a lot of cold cases tied to Cottingham. Sadly, Jennifer has passed away in 2002 from what I read was an aggressive brain tumor. She didn't get to see some of the later confessions go on the record, but her work and her dedication to helping find the truth has not gone unnoticed. Even Cottingham wrote her a farewell letter with deep emotion and credited her for extensively for his confessions. So the first confession we're going to be talking about is Lorraine Montalvo McGraw from Rockland County, New York. She was born on March 10th, 1948. She was a mom of two, and she lived in Long Island City, Queens, New York. She was only 26 at the time of her murder. But she did have a documented history and struggles of drug abuse and prostitution arrests, which she often gave other aliases for. On March 1st, 1970, her nude body was discovered by hikers near South Nyack, Rockland County, New York, in a wooded area of Tweed Boulevard. It was near an old hiking trail and abandoned Camp Bluefield's water tower. The autopsy confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation, but there was also a 4-inch skull fracture over her right ear. She had been missing since February 27, 1970, and her identification was made about a week later through fingerprints. Cottingham provided details that matched the circumstances of her death, then confessed to the murder. Now, Lorraine's granddaughter, Sonia Ruiz, helped assist and facilitate the confession to Detective Connor Fitzgerald of Rockland County, New York District Attorney's Office. The DA's office kind of ignored her request to be present at the confession and also declined to host a press conference of the closure. And I think it was more because they wanted to get more confessions out of him. But she wanted to make a statement on her behalf and her mother's behalf. So she kind of felt betrayed in a way because she helped get, the information and stuff like that. And they said no. But then Peter Vronsky and Jennifer Weiss ensured that she could make a statement and organized a press conference in August of 2022. And that was when the murder was entered into public record. Sorry, I'm so congested and stuff. I'm trying to talk right. But anyway, so it was officially accepted on August 26, 2022, under a non-prosecution agreement, and the case was closed after 52 years. Now, there is a big story about Lorraine's case that I will eventually tell during, her own single podcast, but there was just too much. I want to do a full episode on that in the future, so look out for that in the future. Now, Diane Cusick, now this is a really important one. So Diane Cusick was from Nassau County, New York. She was a 23-year-old woman raised in New Hyde Park, Long Island, New York. She worked as a dance instructor in Oceanside, where she taught young students and pursued her passion for dance. She was described as vibrant, dedicated, and caring, And she was a very active and independent person. And she just, enjoyed being social and shopping. And she was a single mother to her 4-year-old daughter, Darlene, who she adored and prioritized. She had lived she lived with her parents in New Hyde Park at the time of her murder. And her daily life kind of revolved just around working and being a mom and having family responsibilities. Like, she was very, very close with her family. But on February 15th, 1968, she finished work and she told her parents that she was going to go shopping at Green Acres Shopping Center in Valley Stream, Nassau County, New York. So she needed to buy a new pair of dance shoes. She drove her Plymouth Volant to the mall sometime late that afternoon, early evening, and was approached by Richard in the parking lot. He was posing as a security guard, accusing her of stealing so it would make it easier for him to subdue her. And she was very petite, very tiny. She weighed only 98 pounds. So he had easily overpowered her somewhere in or near the car. And the attack was just brutal. She was raped, beaten in the face and head severely, and strangled to death. She had defensive wounds that indicated she fought back against him. Her body was left in the front seat of her car, and when she didn't come home by 10:30 at night, her parents drove to the mall, and they found her car, but they couldn't see inside because it was so dark. So they were reporting her missing, which honestly for her parents it was probably better because I couldn't imagine finding my daughter like that. It must have just been so awful. But anyway, her body was found on February 16th, the following morning, by police. Now, the medical examiner confirmed the cause of death was suffocation due to strangulation, but with additional injuries from the beating. And the case went cold super fast because there was no DNA technology. But there was semen evidence collected, and it couldn't be matched at the time, obviously. Like I said, no DNA technology. Her daughter, Darlene, has spoke publicly about the grief of losing her mother and the life-altering impact it had on her, including like the feeling of abandonment and the challenges of putting together the memories of her mother, which is just so sad. But the case is periodically revisited, but it wasn't until 2022 when they retested the semen sample and the match came back to Cottingham. So he had formerly been charged with Cusick's murder in June of 2022. Now, he appeared virtually from a hospital bed in New Jersey Southwood State Prison, and he pleaded guilty on December 5th, 2022. He was sentenced to another 25 years, but like I've said before, it's purely symbolic. So this was one of his earlier killings because this was 1968. His earliest confirmed is 1965. But this was, until last December, it was known as his earliest killing. I think it was, yeah. Anyway, so her daughter, Darlene, had attended the sentencing, expressing mixed emotions about the closure after so many years. But, like I said, this case was important because under the plea deal, he had admitted to another 4 murders under oath. The murders of Mary Beth Hines, Laverne Moy, Sheila Hyman, Marita Emerita Rosada Nieves. Now, and just to keep myself from repeating myself over and over again, he received no extra jail time for any of these confessions under the plea deal. Not that it would matter anyway, because he's in jail for the rest of his life. But Mary Beth Hines was born January 5th, 1951. And I couldn't find too much about her life, just mostly the circumstances of what happened. She was raised in Mineola, a quiet suburb in Long Island, New York. She grew up in a close-knit, working-class family, and she was one of 7 children. Her father was a New York City police officer, and her mother was a homemaker who always made sure the kids had creative outlets, and making sure that Mary Beth always had plenty of art supplies because she loved art. Her summers were spent in the Poconos helping their grandmother who owned a hotel there. They would clean rooms, swim in pools, and just spend plenty of time outdoors doing things like collecting frogs and turtles. Jean, her sister, recalled the summers, saying these experiences created a sense of togetherness. Now, Mary Beth suffered from epilepsy, which was diagnosed as a child, and she frequently got grand mal seizures. Now, these episodes would sometimes cause loss of consciousness and violent muscle contractions that sometimes occurred daily. So her home life revolved around this, and she had to stick to a very particular routine to minimize the incidents. She wasn't able to drive, so she took public transportation for travel. And her sister Jean would often sleep in the same room just in case she had a seizure so she could intervene and prevent her from swallowing her tongue. Her brother Tommy recalled that it affected her socially as a kid, and she was made fun of a lot because of her condition. But she was also known as a girly girl. She always styled her hair and loved maintaining her appearance, putting on makeup and getting dressed up. She was a caring, responsible, and creative person with passions like baking, arts, drawing, and she also did a lot of Girl Scout activities. And despite her condition, she was independent in all the ways she could be. She worked during the week, and she lived with her family on the weekends. And she worked as a mother's helper, so she was a live-in nanny for a family in Belmore, New York, during the week, and would take the bus back to Mineola on the weekends to spend time with her family. But on Friday, May 5th, 1972, she left work from Belmore to take the bus home. She was excited this weekend because there was a local dance that was organized for people with epilepsy. And she had been planning on going since she found out about it. It was, one of the things she likes to do, get all dressed up and go out. And her family was expecting her, but she never showed up, which immediately caused for concern because... Did I say cause for concern? It immediately caused concern because it was very out of the ordinary. Her parents had even invited over her date for the dance with his mom to wait for her. But after a few hours, they left. So by the morning, her mother was obviously panicking and called the police. And originally, they dismissed it. Mary Beth was 21. She was considered an adult, and they said they couldn't act immediately. Her father was, tried levering his position as a police officer, and he pushed for them to do something. And, I hate this because there's so many instances like this where something happened and, they're too old, so we have to wait longer. That's, crazy. If there's no history of anything like that, there's no reason they should be waiting. But anyway, so May 10th, 1972, 5 days later, 10:45 a.m., her body was found by police floating face down in a muddy creek in a wooded area along Main Avenue, which is west of Peninsula Boulevard in Rockville Center, New York, just 10 miles from her home in Mineola. She was found without shoes, multiple contusions, abrasions, and cuts on her face and neck. It was clear the attack she endured was brutal, and it was a brutal, violent beating before her death. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation. Now, the information doesn't suggest that she was assaulted, which is usually part of Richard Cottingham's MO, but it doesn't say that she was or wasn't, so I'm not too sure. But her father went back to the scene of the murder and found a purse belonging to another woman nearby, and he questioned why it was overlooked. I looked it up. I couldn't really find whose purse it was. There's nothing that says that. But it was also said that there was another murder similar, I don't know if it was a month or two beforehand, in that area, which could be Cottingham's. I don't know. I didn't have the time really to research into what murder it was. But, it could be him. Anyway, the case went cold and there was no immediate suspects. But this murder destroyed her family and her father, who barely spoke about it afterwards. Jean later talked about the grief and trauma it caused her at such a young age and became an advocate for cold case victims, highlighting the importance of mental health and persistence with law enforcement. Unfortunately, her parents passed before they could see a resolution within the case. Under oath, Richard Cottingham confessed to strangling her and throwing her body over the Rockville Center Bridge, specifically the Peninsula Boulevard Bridge. It's not stated, but I assume she wasn't killed right there. He strangled her somewhere else and then moved the body. Now, he provided specific details that only the killer would know about the case, and it wasn't made available to the public. Cottingham appeared via Zoom because he's in prison with health issues, and Jean addressed him directly, thanking him for making his statements to police. He was said to have shown no remorse or response. But Jean said, "I'll never have all the answers to my questions, but I know he did it, and I know it wasn't her fault. Those are two great pieces of information. I really don't need more than that." But she also described him as having no soul. She one of the things she has done too, is help look for one of the family members of one of the other victims, because they haven't been able to find this woman's family members, which stinks because they just can't. I'll get to that case in a couple more minutes, but anyway. So Laverne Moy was a young mother from St. Albans, Queens, New York. She was born around 1949, but I couldn't find her exact date of birth. She was said to be a devoted mother and wife, even though she was separated at the time of her death, daughter and sister. She had 2 young children, a 5-year-old boy, and the other information about the other child is unknown. But her and her husband, John, I said, were separated at the time. He later remarried and became a pastor in North Carolina. And he carried a profound lifelong sense of loss, often talking to her family. Moy's sister, Kim Tinsley, who was 10 at the time of her murder, talked about the family's close bond, including the traumatic experience of going with her parents to identify Laverne's body. Family members portrayed her as the light that shines brightly against the backdrop of evil, emphasizing her premature death before she could fully raise her children. Her son, John Jr., reflected on the feeling of her presence daily and credited her influence for his career success in public service, including roles in the administrations of New York governors Mario Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo, and his current position with his director of the National Urban League of Atlanta. Now, the circumstances aren't extremely available to the public. There's not a lot of information about this. But they did rely heavily on Cottingham's confession. She had disappeared in mid-July of 1972, and under oath, Cottingham had confessed to strangling her in a location not specified, but he did move the body post-mortem. He threw her body over the Peninsula Boulevard Bridge in Rockville Center in Nassau County into a muddy creek below, which was the same location where Mary Beth Hines' body was found. And also, there was no indication of a sexual assault or rape. Doesn't mean that it wasn't, but I didn't see any information about it. So Sheila Hyman was 33 years old from North Woodmere, an affluent suburb in Long Island. She was married to Leon Hyman. They had 3 kids, 2 boys and 1 girl. They lived a family-oriented life in their home on Mulberry Place, which is just, that sounds like such a cookie-cutter home, Mulberry Place is where I live. It's so cute. Anyway, where she focused on raising children and maintaining the household. She was a stay-at-home mom. She was described as loving and kind. Her husband portrayed her as deeply cherished, and he said to have loved her profoundly and struggled with the aftermath of her death until he passed away. At the time of her murder, the children were away at summer camp upstate. So on the morning of July 20th, exactly 1 year after the discovery of Laverne Moy's body, Sheila was home alone with while her husband was out shopping. Cottingham confessed to bludgeoning her and stabbing her in the master bedroom. And this attack was also very brutal. Multiple lacerations to the skull, a fractured jaw, lacerated jugular vein, and leading to her death from blunt force trauma and blood loss. Now, this was different than his normal MO. He stabbed her and bludgeoned her, which he usually strangles them, but that's strange to me. Like, sometimes it seems like his attacks are just all over the place. Like, nothing is the same as the other ones. But I guess, like, over the years, things change, too. But anyway, so there was no sign of any sexual assault on public records, though that included elements of sexual violence. Now, Leon returned and found her body in the early afternoon, but the case went cold almost immediately, just like all the other cases. Leon lived in a cloud of suspicion for decades, initially being suspected because he was the husband and he found the body. Now, her son Todd heard about it on the news while at camp. And when they talked about their 3 children being away at camp, he simply stated, "We were the 3 children away." Her daughter, Randy Childs, has spoke publicly at the 2022 hearing, speaking openly to clear her father's name, describing him as a kind and generous man who loved their mother deeply and spent years living in the shadows of his wife's murder. She also noted that there was no reason he should have been suspected and expressed relief of the closure, though bittersweet her father wasn't alive to see it. Now, this one is like one of the few home invasion style killings. I think he did, like, those were like how he committed his murders early on. And then later on, he changed, he started going to the hotels and everything. So Marita Amarita Rosada Nieves was an 18-year-old woman from Puerto Rico who had moved and lived in Manhattan, New York. Now, details are limited about her personal life, and I don't know if it's because she had recently moved from Puerto Rico. There's not much information about her. And people are also still trying to find her family because they haven't been able to contact family since Cottingham confessed. But like I said, there's no extensive information about anything because of her being so new to the United States. And back then, they didn't really document immigrant victims that much either. So she had disappeared in December of 1973, though the exact date is unknown. And Cottingham admitted to abducting her and strangling her. He had dumped her body in a weeded, overgrown area near a bus stop at Jones Beach in Wantagh, Nassau County, New York. It was in especially thick grass on the north side of Ocean Parkway in a bus loading area adjacent to the East Bathhouse. He wrapped her remains in plastic bags, covered them with a gray blanket, and left them concealed in vegetation. The body was discovered on December 27th, 1973, by park maintenance workers conducting routine checks in the area, and the case went cold very quickly. But, like, you know what? Like, it kind of seems sometimes like that, the way he disposed of the body, was just different than the other times. So, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like the things he's done is just all over the place. Like, he really acts out of impulse, I guess. But anyway, so Rosalie Riceberg was a registered nurse in 1949, or born in 1949. Though I couldn't find the exact date of birth, she was 26 at the time of death. Her dad was John DePaula, and her mom was Rose DePaula. Couldn't find too much about her childhood, just that she did have one sibling who was a brother. And she grew up in a close-knit American-Italian family. She was passionate about healthcare, and she worked at the Columbus Presbyterian Medical Center, now which is the New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan. She was married to Dr. Barry Riceberg, a psychiatrist. They lived in a brownstone apartment at 327 West 8th Street on Manhattan's Upper West Side. They had no children, and her home life revolved around her work and her family, who she spoke to often, especially her mother, almost daily. And she just liked to do normal things like go out and go shopping. She was remembered as a kind-hearted professional no enemies, or involvement in any type of high-risk behavior. Now, the details of the murder were put together from the 1975 police investigation and the confession. So on October 21st, 1975, she was home alone in her apartment, which was located on the first floor while her husband was at work. She had spoke to her mother around 11 a.m. and discussed her plans for the day, which kind of helped establish a timeline for what happened. Now, she had a hair appointment scheduled for 4, but she never showed up. There was no signs of forward entry, suggesting that the killer had kind of been let in under a ruse, which was like a maintenance worker or an authority figure, like a cop or someone, which was similar to some of Cottingham's other attacks on women in their home. She was attacked in the master bedroom, strangled, and he left ligature marks on her neck. Her throat was also deeply slashed with a knife, causing fatal lacerations. She was found partially unclothed from the waist down, indicating that there may have been a sexual assault, but there was no sign of rape or semen left behind. The cause of death was blood loss from the slashing in combination with the strangulation. The time of death was estimated between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Now, she was discovered at 5:30 when her husband came home from work and found the body in the bedroom. Immediately he called the police, which they described as horrific but contained. Like, there was no blood trails and no other evidence anywhere. Now, New York Police Department investigated intensely. They interviewed neighbors, family members, but the trail went cold quick. There was no witnesses reporting anything strange, not even hearing like any screams or seeing anyone they didn't know that day. Of course, initial suspicions were the husband, but he had an alibi since he was at work the time that she was killed. And the case went cold in late 1975. Now, Richard confessed to this crime on December 2nd, 2024. The confession coincided with the information that hadn't been made public, so they believed that he was telling the truth. Now, this brought resolution to her husband, who was profoundly affected, and again, this man lived under a shadow of suspicion and held on to the grief for years. But despite the tragedy, he went on to become a very successful expert in Alzheimer's research and spoke publicly about the loss. Unfortunately, both of Rosalie's parents had passed before they had a chance to get closure, and her brother passed away in 2025, so at least he got to receive that final piece of justice. So now, I did a full podcast on this case, Alice Jean Eberhardt. I can't remember how long ago it was, but I did so if you go through my old podcast, you will find this, and I'm just going to do a little brief overview of it. Now, this ended up being the earliest confession. This took place in 1965, and Alice Jean Eberhardt was an 18-year-old nursing student who lived with her parents in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. She was attending nursing school at Hackensack Hospital, training as a nursing student. Now, Cottingham was about 19 years old at the time, and he saw her in the parking lot leaving work. Now, I think he had watched her for about 2 weeks, and then he followed her home this day, knocked on the door, and posed as a cop, saying he needed to leave a phone number for her father. Once he was inside, he bludgeoned her, which was the primary fatal injury causing death. He also stabbed her multiple times in the neck and just all over the body. Her body was discovered by her father later that day when he returned home. And the assault was just savage. No sign of forced entry, no robbery. All the valuables were untouched. Now, the medical examiner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma to the head, with the stab wounds contributing. The case drew significant attention at the time, but no immediate suspects were identified. It was reopened in 2021 after one of Eberhardt's old classmates and leading detectives started to investigate into Cottingham. And in late 2025, Cottingham's health began deteriorating, so he began to express willingness to talk about some of the other murders he committed. Fair lawn detectives met with him about 5 times, and in the final interview, December of 2025, he provided a full verbal confession followed by a written one. He also shared corroborating evidence over the details that were never made public, like this house layout and the circumstances and everything that happened. Now, Cottingham has said he's never meant to kill anyone and that it was just something that has happened. This case, no files or charges, and it was closed as of January 2026. So, yeah, like I said, this case was really important because it was the earliest case in 1965. So the 67 case, he's been murdering for 2 years since 67. I'm sure there was murders in between that. Like the brutality of this murder makes me feel that he, and all his murders really, makes me feel like he has definitely committed other ones. Like, he just went in and went full force on this murder. I don't think so. When he has said that he's committed 85 to 100 perfect murders. Though some believe that he is exaggerating, I just don't, because he's obviously a sick and twisted person. I don't know why they wouldn't believe him. But during the last confession, he was said to be on his deathbed, but I do hope that he confesses to some other murders before he passes for the sake of the victims' families. Though I also believe that having him sit in prison is just a waste of taxpayers' money, especially when the crimes he's committed are as disturbing and gruesome as these. But that's where I end today's episode. This was another longer than normal episode, but I just really feel like every victim's case is worth mentioning. Like I said earlier, I do believe I'm gonna do single podcasts for each of the victims, so I can do like real deep dives into their cases. But this has been very exhausting. Doing the research on the serial killers is really exhausting. So next week I'm gonna do something a little different, maybe a cool ghost story or something like that. But anyway, stay safe out there, guys. Until next week.